Alright guys, we have a brand new SP character on JP, which is SP Tanaka. So let's go through his kit and also I'll give you guys my first impression of them. I will also talk about his memory towards the end of the video as well, by the way. But his memory is one of the best in the game. Okay, I'm already going to tell you guys this up front, so definitely save up for it. So let's start off with his skill 1. His receive and power tab will increase by 10%. He is a receive and auto power label character, by the way, so this kind of makes sense. And then at the beginning of this skill called Superb Line Shot, which is basically his ultimate tab, your enemies from row is going to gain this debuff effect called Tension. And then afterwards, whenever you decide to make a perfect play, or you actually use this ultimate tab, the opponent with Tension would have their stats matching their specialty tab reduced by 5%, lasting for at least one rally. Now, this is somewhat interesting in the sense that, first of all, the reduction or the debuff is based on the opponent's specialty tab. So if you have the loss of, let's say, Hoshimi Korai, all 5 of their stats will be reduced. However, also at the same time, because they only last for one rally, and normally you only tend to build a character for only like 1 or 2 purposes, it's very likely, even if you can reduce as many, let's say, 5 stats, probably only one or two of them will actually be the useful ones that really make a difference. Okay. The one thing which I'm not too sure how I feel about this is that one of the condition is that you have to make a perfect play. Now the thing in this game is that when you make a perfect play, because a lot of the bad, normal, perfect, they kind of translate to each other. So when you make a perfect receive, for example, your set can only be perfect or normal. So there's already a high chance of your set being perfect. And then when your set is perfect, your spike is guaranteed to be perfect. So a lot of times there's all kind of like chain reaction. And what that basically means is that this can potentially snowball or not make any impact at all. And normally when you already have a whole sequence of like perfect actions, so for example, perfect receive, perfect set, perfect spike, you're very likely to win that point already. And because of the snowball effect, for example, you make those 3 perfect actions in a row, all of the enemy is going to have their stats reduced by 15%, especially the enemy front row, right? That's one of the things from the skill as well. Enemy from row will get this, and then therefore their block stat will increase, reduce by 15%. Now it's going to make you a lot easier to actually then win the point. However, you can also look at it from the other angle, which is that normally when you don't make a perfect play, it's very hard for you to win a point, and you may actually lose that point. And in those kind of cases, this is not going to make any difference at all. So I almost wonder whether or not like the actual impact of his skill, because to me, it feels like it's going to snowball and just make you win more, but winning a lot more of the points you already have a high chance to win. Whereas for the points where you're not likely to win, this is not going to make any difference at all. So that's kind of why I'm not too sure how I actually feel about this event, especially because in this game it's not very clear how all of those perfect, normal, bad conditions are determined. So that's kind of why personally I feel like this sounds very good on paper, but to me it may have this impact of just making you win points which you already have high chance of winning, and then when it comes to the crucial point where you really want to turn around, this isn't actually going to help at all. Okay, so that's just my concern for his skill 1. Then moving on to his skill 2. When you perform a receive, or when Tanaka perform a receive, it's only going to be 140% multiplied because it's just a normal skill. However, if the opponent's spike actually have a tension debuff, this is going to all the way increase by an additional 150%. So that in total is 290%, which all of a sudden make it comparable to an ultimate attack. Furthermore, if they have a tension debuff, you will be guaranteed to be perfect for the very first time in each set as well. This one to me, it's a very interesting one because, for example, if your receive is already going to be perfect, then you don't really care about this additional 150% to this, right? Sure, this is only going to be for the first time each set, but there's a cooldown for 6 necrosing anyway, so it's not like you will be actually triggering the skill multiple times in a match. So whilst this skill, if you actually read it, have 2 very interesting and very strong effects. The 2 almost kind of like you only need one of them, right? If it's already going to be perfect, then I don't really need this additional extra 150. Other than maybe in club contest, yes, sure, it looks higher with a higher number. But other than that, the actual result is going to be the same because it will be a perfect receive. Okay, so that's pretty much my interpretation of this. How often you actually trigger this is going to be another question because it kind of requires the opponent spiker have this tension debuff. And unless you get his skill resonance, which I'll talk about in a bit, but unless you actually have his skill resonance, otherwise it's only the opponent front row who will be getting that tension debuff. Okay, so that's something you have to bear in mind as well. Now, next thing we have is going to be skill 3. So when Tanaka actually spikes the ball, if the set was perfect, the power will increase by 40% and will always be critical. And then when he's actually on the court, the opponent with tension, when they touch the ball for the first time each rally, their stats decrease by 3%. This doesn't even go higher. So first of all, let's start off with the second part. This part to me is almost like non-existent because first of all, the number is really, really small. It's only 3%. Second thing, it's only for 2 net crossing, which kind of require that player to perform 2 actions in a row. For blockers, for setters, that may be the case if you only have, let's say, 1 blocker up front or only 1 setter in the team. But if you actually talk about like receive skills and also spiking skill, unless the opponent is capable of spamming receives and also spamming ultimate back to back, otherwise they're unlikely going to be touching using the same stats for twice, well, twice within that 2 net crossing, right? So this to me is a pretty, I mean, almost non-existent skill. Then if we actually take a look at the first half, I'm not a great fan of this either. Sure, the effect's very strong. If the set was perfect, the power will increase by 40% and will always be critical. But the thing is, once again, in this game, it's not very clear how all of the perfect conditions are determined. It's not necessarily, if your set was critical, then it will trigger, because critical, you can actually control for that. You can build your setter with higher awareness, etc. But perfect, it's not really something that we can control. The only way to control it that I know of right now is using SP Kenma, the second version of SP Kenma's memory. But that is only for 1 time in each rally, and that requires perfect receive, which once again, you can't really guarantee unless you play SP Kenma version 2 as well. Okay, so obviously this Tanaka, SP Tanaka have huge amount of synergy with SP Kenma, especially with also the skill 1. If you can't get a perfect receive, then go into a perfect set, go into a perfect spike, all of a sudden that's a 15% debuff as well. Okay, however, without SP Kenma and that memory, this to me is basically one thing that you can't really control. And if you can't really control this, it also kind of makes building Tanaka a bit difficult, because you might be thinking, if I can actually control this to make sure my set is always perfect, then I don't even need to bother with any awareness stats on my Tanaka. But because it's not controllable, now you have a bit of a dilemma. Do I put some awareness stats on him, in which case it would just be wasted if the set was perfect? Or do you want to risk not putting awareness on him, in which case if the set is not perfect, it would never be critical? It just goes into a bit of a dilemma. So that's kind of why I'm not a great fan of the skill 3 for the fact that you can't really control when your set will be perfect. Okay, now let's move on to his skillful. Now skillful, the base multiplier is only going to be 250%, which is quite low in comparison for other SP characters. However, if you actually respite for just the first time in each rally, the power is actually going to increase by 100%. So that in total is already 350%, which is insane. That's higher than any other SP character. And whilst it's only going to be for the first time each rally, let's be honest, you have a cooldown for 8 net crossing. You normally would only be spiking 1 time in each rally anyway. So this is almost going to be like a constant buff on him. Like whenever you spike, it's going to be 350% multiplier, which is higher than any other character. And that can go even higher as well, because if you are actually able to get 15 times reduction due to Tanaka's skill, so that would be from his skill 1 and also skill 3, for example. What's going to happen, you can increase that by additional 100% of power attack stat. Now this is very, very strong, because if you actually think about that, from his skill 1, you're already able to get 3 of the enemy front row with his tension debuff. When you make a perfect play, you're already able to basically inflict that. And like I said, if you do a perfect receive, perfect set, going into a perfect spike, which to be honest, happens quite a lot because of that snowball effect and the fact that all of the perfect action translate to the next action directly afterwards. What's going to happen is that all of a sudden that's 9 debuff you're already able to apply. So to actually get to this 15 times reduction, it's actually going to be very, very easy. You basically just take 2 rallies and you'll already be able to fulfill it. So for the good bulk of the match, what Tanaka is actually going to do is actually a whooping 450% multiplier in his ult, which is really, really high in comparison to other characters. Okay. Now let's move on to his skill resonance. As skill resonance 2, if the opponent play is not perfect, you will also be able to inflict this debuff from tension. So it's exactly the same as skill 1, but rather than the condition being you making perfect, now the condition is opponent not making perfect. And then at the same time, when they receive a debuff, your awareness and reflex will increase by 5% up to maximum 50. Now, first of all, this is very easy to trigger. Like I said, if you already have this one snowball effect or sequence of perfect receive, receive, perfect set, perfect play. That's already 9 debuff, okay? So this is actually ridiculously easy to achieve, and that also makes it very somewhat nice in terms of his skill 3, because before I was talking about it's hard to think about how to actually build Tanaka when you can't control for a set to be perfect, and therefore your spike will be critical. But now with this, at least you really kind of have like a base 50% already, and you're able to take more of a risk with this, because even if your set was not perfect, you still have a base 50% chance of it to be critical anyway. So you don't have to actually build any potential on him specifically for awareness, which is nice. Okay, so this part I definitely do like. In terms of the first half, once again, I don't know how I feel about this. I feel like once again it's one of those snowball effect, right? If the opponent is not even making perfect play, normally it's going to be quite easy for you to win that match as well. So once again, this is to me, it's always like one of those win more condition. It just kind of snowballs into that for the points which you are likely to win, you are just going to be a bit more certain to win them. But for the points which are not so certain, what you are more likely to lose, it's not going to help at all. Okay, so that's kind of my gut reaction in terms of like all of his Tanaka skill in terms of the debuff. Then in terms of skill resonance 4, this is where it gets really, really interesting. Okay. So first of all, skill resonance 2 effect is going to change, because before it says when Tanaka is actually on the core, now this condition is going to be removed, okay? So you no longer need this condition of Tanaka being on the core. Same thing for ace level spike, which is skill 3. So for example, this part, when the opponent with tension touch the ball, once again, it says Tanaka needs to be on the core, but this is also going to change to doesn't say whether or not Tanaka needs to be on the court as well. And then at the same time, there's also going to be an additional effect, which is when relentless pursuit, which is which is basically skill 2. When this is cast, the enemy in the back row is also going to get this tension effect. And when you make a perfect play, his strength is also going to increase as well. Okay, this increase to strength, once again, make a perfect play. I feel like it's just one of those snowball things, right? If you're already able to make perfect play, very likely you would win that point. So does this strength increase even matter anymore? I don't know. Take this however you want. But the nice thing about this is that it kind of opens up to two things. First of all, now the opponent back row is also able to get tension. So essentially what can happen is that if you have him to do a receive and then also to do a spike right afterwards, you can actually have both the enemy front row and back row all having tension effect, and that basically, let's say, allow you to build up this so much faster, twice as well as all of the other things which kind of rely on how many tension debuff needs to be applied. So this is already very, very nice, but it kind of require him to actually receive first of all. One thing I'm not too sure about this, and it doesn't really say, is that all of the debuff that come with tension seems to actually have a duration. So for example, it only lasts for 1 rally, or for example, skill 3 sets for 2 necrosis. It doesn't actually say what's the duration of tension, and if tension actually lasts for a whole match, then this also opens up something else, which is that because a lot of the effect on skill resonance 4 change to Tanaka doesn't even need to be on the court, you can almost make Tanaka to get on, you do a receive, do a spike, land all 6 of the opponent with that tension debuff effect. Because if it lasts for a whole match, I'm making assumption here, if it actually indeed lasts for a whole match, what's going to happen is that even once Tanaka's been subbed off, the opponent is still going to be landed with all of those random debuff every now and then from his. I don't actually know whether or not skill 1 also works when Tanaka is off the court, because it's not specifically mentioned on skill resonance 4, but also the skill itself never even mentioned Tanaka has to be on the court as well. So in those cases, and because you can also make this debuff happen when your side make a perfect play, it doesn't even say Tanaka has to do anything with it. So I have a feeling this can also activate when Tanaka is not on the court. And then with the help of skill resonance 4, essentially the right way of doing that is probably get him to do a receive and also a spike to land all 6 enemy with this tension effect, and then afterwards sub him off, and you're still able to reap all of the benefit of those debuff from the tension whenever you make a perfect play or when the enemy don't make a perfect play. Okay, so to me that might be the most optimal way of building Tanaka. The only annoying thing with this is that if you do actually want to build him this way, you have to make sure you actually land a receive with him as well. And that may actually require you to build Tanaka with a receive build rather than a spike build, because you can control when to use spike or which character to use spike, right? That part you can control. So you can definitely land those 3 front row enemy with his tension. However, in order to land the 3 back row enemy with tension, you have to do a receive, which you can't control in this game. And the only way to increase that likelihood is just to make sure your Tanaka's receive stats is actually really, really high, higher than your other back row characters. So in that kind of senses, I might actually suggest building Tanaka if you're planning to play him as a sub and then try to get all of those benefits of the debuff even after it's been subbed off. I'll probably actually suggest building Tanaka with a receive build so that he can quickly trigger all of those tension effects and then sub him off, and then you are just basically going to benefit from all of those debuffs without him even being on the cool. So that's going to be my personal gut reaction of how you actually want to play Tanaka once you actually have him as skill resonance full. If you don't have him as skill resonance full, obviously this doesn't make sense because you actually have to be on the court in order to benefit from all of those effects. Then in which case I think you probably just build him as a traditional spiker and to benefit from his insane 450% multiplier of his ultimate attack. Okay, so that's going to be my initial source on how you want to play him. In terms of the bond, this bond to me feels like fairly average, and is nowhere near as insane as the one between Kenma and Lief. Basically increase their power and receive by 850. That's quite nothing if you actually compare to what the level of stats they can actually obtain once they are fully duped or fully maxed out, fully built, etc. So I don't actually think this is that high. One nice thing is that it does increase both attack and receive. Okay, so what that basically means is that even if you build them for just one particular stat, at least the other stats is not being left behind completely, because at least you have a fairly decent baseline buff, because this is not actually scaling based on the base stats. Okay, it's just a flat number here. Then the other thing is when the opponent has a debuff, your attack technique and defense technique will also increase. Obviously, attack technique and defense technique, those are some of the more rare ability, so it's always nice to have them increase, but it's only just 10%. Okay, so this to me is a fairly standard level of bond. I don't think it's insanely strong, but it's definitely not bad either. Then, like I said, the last thing I'll talk about is going to be his memory, which is insane. So basically what's going to happen is that when the equipper performs a power spike, if the blocker has a debuff, you're able to increase that by a whooping 80%. Like, this is just crazy. Like, I don't even know what to say. Like, this outshines pretty much all of the memories out there. I have never seen scaling in a multiplier in memory which is more than 50%. I don't think I've ever seen that, and this is just absolutely crazy. At the highest level, 120% increase. This is just crazy. Okay, this is definitely the best memory you could ever see, or at least I have ever seen so far. Okay, so what's going to be my verdict on SP Tanaka? First of all, I think as skill resonance form, he's definitely very, very strong. Because essentially he's able to help your team even without even being on the court. So basically use him as a sub and still benefit from all of those debuff effect. Okay, so skill resonance 4 definitely insanely strong. Skill resonance 2 or lower, however, I don't actually think he's that good. I think he's pretty mid. So basically, he does have a very strong skill 4. So with that high base multiplier, which you can get as high as 450. So that's very high. But the thing is, he kind of lacks self buff in any of the other multipliers. Like, he doesn't really increase his power attack by too much. This is the power attack spike increased by 40%. I feel like this is also because this is not the stats itself, so I feel like this is going to the same multiplier as the base multiplier from his own, so this will just be diluted. And then other than that, he doesn't really do much self buff in terms of power attack, like this just a base 10%. And then there's no buff in terms of his strength either, war attack technique. The strength buff only comes from skill resonance 4. So once again, as skill resonance 4, you might as well play him as in a substitution role, right? So that's kind of why as skill resonance 2 or lower, even though he may have a very high number on paper, he lacks that self buff to make him actually shine in comparison to other spikers. So if you do actually want to play him and make him one of your main spiker, you have to make sure your teammates are actually able to give him sufficient buff to make sure he actually hit us hard. Then the other thing to note is going to be his debuff effect, but to me that's just one of those win more situation, but wouldn't really help you in the most crucial time. So obviously you are only able to land those debuff when you are doing critical play, or sorry, when you're making perfect play and your opponents are not making perfect play, and in which case you are already very likely to win those points anyway. So do you really need those debuff? And then conversely, in the situation when the opponent has the advantage, so for example, they're making the perfect play, you're not making the perfect play, this is not going to help you at all to overturn that situation either. So I don't personally value it that much. I normally prefer characters who are able to actually overturn a match for me rather than trying to help me to secure a point in a situation where I'm already like 90% likely to win that point anyway. So that's going to be my personal thoughts on Tanaka. So, but yeah, let me know what you guys think of him. Is that someone you want to save up